Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let the Bible speak. Don't speak for the Bible. Open the book and let's have a revival. It's about the truth. It's about survival. Return to the basics. Get back in the Bible.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about John 1, verse 1, particularly clause C, the Word was God, so that we can understand what is truly being conveyed to us. Because the way a Trinitarian would read this verse, or even a oneness would read this verse, is not what is forced by the grammar itself. So we're going to look at the Greek grammar to better understand what is going on and move from there. So that said, let's go ahead and get the Bible on the screen. So we read the verse. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Wow. I am authentic. I'm getting flagged on TikTok for not having a... Hold on. TikTok annoys me sometimes. I'm completely authentic here. This is me. Hello. Yeah, look at my videos. I'm Jaybird. Jesse, sorry. Alright, so yeah, the Word was God. Can we say the Word was God and God was the Word? No, we cannot. Why? Because the grammar does not permit that. What do you mean? Well, in order to understand this, we're going to read from Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics about predicate nominatives, as well as I also have a video for you in which, I need to make a hotkey for real quick. So if you could excuse me, I didn't think to do that to make a shortcut. So we got Logos Bible Study is number 3. We're going to change that to VLC player. Here's the VLC player. There it is, 60. Cool. And reset. Okay, yeah, we'll have, sorry about that, Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics available to us. So, yeah. Alright, so first thing I want to do is I want to pull up the logos and read a little bit about this. This may be a recap for anyone that was in my previous live. I just held a live on John 17:3 to try to explain why Trinitarians cannot read John 17:3 in a way that would cause Jesus to be included in the only true God, but not make Jesus the Father. The grammar doesn't permit that, but I'm not going to go backwards. I'm going to move forward. So, predicate nominative. The predicate nominative is approximately the same as the subject and is joined by an equative verb, whether stated or implied. The usage is very common. The equative of the subject and predicate does not necessarily or even normally imply a complete respondent. Example, as in the interchangeability of A equals B and B equals A in the mathematical formula. So let's apply that real quick. Let's have a look at John 1:1c. Sorry. So this would be the subject, the Word, and the predicate nominative would be God. And it's saying that in this sentence structure, the subject and the predicate are not always interchangeable, which means you can say the Word was God, but you would not be able to say God was the Word if this falls in that category, and it actually does. Moving back to logos here, or back to Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics, it says, rather, the predicate nominative normally describes a larger category or state to belong, to which the subject belongs. So in John 1:1c, the Word belongs to a larger category. What is that category? God. And that category, is that a personal category or can that be a state? I would say that it's a state. I would say the Word was God's person. I would not say that the Word was God, a God. But to say that the Word was God's person does not mean God's person was the Word. That's different. The Greek does not convey that, as we'll learn. So it says, it is important to keep in mind, however, that there are two distinct types of predicate nominative constructions. These will be discussed below. Now it talks about the verbs used for this equation are most frequently Amy, Genomai, and Huparco, in addition to the passives of some transitive verbs can be used. That is, an example is kaleo, means to call, or eurisco, which means to find in the passive voice. That if the subject is called something, what he is called is the same thing as the subject himself. If someone is found to be something, then what they are found to be is the same thing as the subject itself. Not in a complete interchangeability, but in these respects, because there are other people's. Like I brought up in my previous live, you shall call his name Jesus. So, he shall be called Jesus. We'll do it that way. He shall be called Jesus. He and Jesus are the same, but Jesus and he, Jesus is not always numerically identical to the he because there's other people named Jesus in the Bible and in reality. So that's some examples of how passive verbs can be used. Moving forward, it says translation of the predicate nominative clauses. English translations require that the subject be translated first, such is not the case in Greek. And John 1:1, for example, Theos ein ho logos should be translated the Word was God rather than God was the Word. And that's significant. If you can't say the Word was God and God was the Word, that means the Word is not numerically identical to God. It is God in another way. And I hold the view that the Word represents God, and a representation is not the thing which is represented. But since Greek word order is far more flexible than English, this creates a problem. How do we distinguish subject from predicate nominative if word order is not a clear guide? The following section will offer a detailed solution. The semantics and exegetical significance of the subject predicate nominative construction. Two kinds of semantic relationships. The significance of the subject predicate construction affects more than mere translation precisely because the subject and predicate nominative do not involve total interchangeability. The usual relationship between the two is that the predicate nominative describes the class to which the subject belongs. This is known as the subset proposition, where the subject is subset to predicate nominative. So in John 1:1c, the Word would be in a class of God, but the class of God would not be the Word. This would be a subset proposition. This would show that the Word and God are not interchangeable because they are not the exact same thing. Thus, the meaning of the Word was flesh is not the same as flesh was the Word. The Word was God is not the same as God was the Word in John 1:1c. Because flesh is broader than the Word. the word of the cross is foolishness in 1 Corinthians 1:18. That does not mean foolishness is the word of the cross, for there are other kinds of foolishness. God is love is not the same as love is God. It can thus be seen in these examples that is does not necessarily mean equal. Now, this would be a case where is does mean equal. But there is another, less frequent semantic relationship between S and PN, subject and predicate nominative, sometimes called the convertible proposition. This construction indicates an identical exchange. That is to say, both nouns have identical referent. The mathematical formulas of A equal B and B equal A are applicable in such instances. A statement such as Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player in NBA history means the same thing as the greatest player in NBA history is Michael Jordan. There is a complete interchange between the two. These are the two relationships graphically represented in the chart below. Over here, we have a predicate nominative in a subset proposition where the subject is actually inside of a broader category. This would be John 1:1c, where the word would actually fall into a broader category called God, and it does not mean that God was the word, or else it would be in a convertible proposition. Now, with that said, let's look at semantic relations of subject and predicate. The distinguishing. Yes, we'll talk about how to distinguish the two in just a moment. But what I want to do is play a clip from Daniel B. Wallace himself to hear the scholar in action. So, that said, let's go ahead and listen.
So here are the 7 most common nominative uses, and these are numbered. We're skipping number 7 in my grammar. We're going to number 8, but we have subject, predicate, nominative, nominative in simple apposition, nominative absolute, nominativus pendens, parenthetic nominative, and of course the nominative for vocative. Now, as I said, we're going to focus on the predicate nominative, but we'll touch on a couple of these others briefly. The subject, which is absolutely a routine usage, is the substantive in the nominative case that is frequently the subject of a finite verb. And the verb may be explicitly stated or implied. The subject may be explicitly stated or implied. So in Greek, sometimes the verb is not there, sometimes the subject is not there, it's just implied in the verb. You can do it both ways. I'm not going to give you any examples of the subject because it's so routine. If you don't know what a nominative subject is, then you probably should go back to first year Greek.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I forgot to turn my microphone back on. Sorry. So, what he just said was the verb to be is sometimes implied, and in such situations, the subject will be there. Okay, he didn't say that, but that is a fact. And then sometimes the subject is not there, but the linking verb is implied. Hold on, the subject wouldn't be there. The linking verb is there. The subject is built into the linking verb because it has a first, second, or third person, which would be a I, you, he, she, or it, and whether or not it's singular or plural, and whether or not it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. So you would be able to add the appropriate pronoun as a subject based on the formation of the verb itself. It's not always present. Now, I brought up earlier a good example of this is if we were to go to Psalms 82 verse 6. Psalm 82 verse 6. And we look at it in the Septuagint where it says, I said, God, you are, right? There is no subject here stated you, but you is built into the verb itself. Why? Because the verb is a second person, that's you. And it's plural, that means basically you all. And then God. So this would be the linking verb that has the subject built into it. The linking verb is present, but the linking verb is present, but the subject is not. It's built into the linking verb. Now, let me give you an example of when the linking verb would not be present. Let's go to John chapter 4, verse 24. So, in John chapter 4, verse 24, we have, hold on. There it is. This is pneuma ho theos, spirit the God. And this is understood as, God is spirit. There's no verb of to be here to say God is spirit, but is implied based on the construction of the sentence itself, which I did not read yet in Greek grammar beyond the basics, but I will. I just want to give you guys a little sneak peek at Daniel B. Wallace explaining these things. Go back to the book. That way, you don't just feel like you went to a movie theater and watching, a scholar. So that said, let's go ahead and go back to that video and hear what else he has to say more on the subject.
Now we want to look at the predicate nominative. The predicate nominative is approximately the same as the subject, and I italicized approximately. I'm underscoring this because it may not be exactly the same as the subject, and there's two different kinds of predicate nominatives. The equation of subject and predicate nominative, and this is an important point to get, does not necessarily or even normally imply complete correspondence. So don't think that is the same as an equal sign. It's not as if you have A equals B, which is a convertible proposition, B equals A. That's true for some predicate nominative constructions, but not all of them. So
that's important. So the verb of to be is not an equal sign. All right, so let's just change John 1:1c to say the word is God, okay? So that it sounds like an equal sign, right? Okay, to say the word is God and God is the word, it would show complete interchangeability. But the Greek construction actually forbids that type of reading. Therefore, the verb of to be would not be treated as an equal sign because the word is God is not the same as God is the word based on the Greek construction, which we will get into here shortly. So, moving forward.
we'll get into that, and we'll get into some really key exegetical significance as we look at this. So there's three considerations as we begin. The kinds of verbs that are used, the translation of subject and predicate nominative clauses, and the semantics and exegetical significance of the subject predicate nominative construction, or these equative clauses. The kinds of verbs that are used are typically I, me, genomai, huparko. Those are going to be those stative verbs. You also get passives of some verbs that can also be used, such as kaleo and heurisko, that are in the passive. I call and I find. I am called, I am found, or he was found to be a man, like we have in Philippians chapter 2. Those kinds of verbs also can function as equative verbs.
Okay. So let me go backwards just a little bit here. Get that chart back on the screen there. All right, so Amy would represent the verb of to be, which represents your state of being. Genomai represents a change of state, so it would be a change in your state of being. Hupa or ko means basically to begin under. It would talk about your state of being regarding your existence. Um, that's the simplest way I could explain hoop or co. Now, there are some passive transitive verbs that can be used. In order to form a passive verb into English, you have to add the verb of to be with, let me think about this. I believe it's the past tense participle of the verb itself. Like, for example, is called, called is past tense, right? But is present tense. It's telling you the person's present tense state of being is called by an identity. And that's what's being expressed. Passive, some of them can show a predicate nominative structure because in order to translate that into English, you have to put the verb to be, which represents your state of being. And if we're talking about identity in relation to your state of being, it would fall under this category. That said, let's move forward.
Philippians chapter 2, those kinds of verbs also can function as equative verbs. The predicate nominative, in terms of the translation of the subject and the predicate nominative clauses, is as follows. The subject should be translated first in English, regardless of the word order in Greek. And of course, word order varies in Greek significantly. So you were taught in first year Greek, don't translate just by the words in sequence. You have to convert it into English because our sequencing is vital to understanding since we don't have a highly inflected language. But the problem then is, since word order in Greek can vary in terms of the order of subject and predicate nominative, how do we distinguish the subject from the predicate nominative?
Okay, so now would be a great time for us to go back to the logos. All right, and read the next section. So, how do we know the difference between which noun is the subject and which noun is the predicate? Well, here we go. Thus, examining the predicate nominative clauses, two fundamental questions need to be answered. How can we distinguish the subject and predicate nominative since the word order is not an infallible guide? And what is the semantic relationship between the two? Is the subject a particular within a larger class of predicate nominative, or is it interchangeable with the predicate nominative? Is God is the word in a larger class of God, or is the word interchangeable with God? In John 1:1c. How to distinguish subject from predicate nominative. This is key. The general principle for distinguishing the subject from the predicate nominative is that the subject is the known entity. So the subject is known. We know what we're talking about. If there is a verb and the subject is built into the verb, it's going to be a pronoun. Pronouns are going to refer to that which has already been identified in the text. And that is the key to understanding which one is which. This principle is valid for both kinds of subject predicate nominative. So whether you're dealing with a subset proposition or you're dealing with a convertible proposition, this rule will apply for both. You can come up with the subject from both in this way. In the Greek equative clauses, the known entity S will be distinguished from the predicate nominative in one of three ways discussed below. The significance of the following three rules is that when only one nominative substantive has such a grammatical tag, the semantic relationship will be that of, will be that of particular subject to a class predicate nominative. That is, the construction will be a subset proposition. So, the subject will be a pronoun, whether stated or implied in the verb. Pronoun like hutos, which is mentioned in John 1:2. The same was in the beginning with God. This was in the beginning with God. That would be hutos. It's a demonstrative pronoun pointing back to something that has already been previously identified as the subject in the context, which would be the word in John 1:1a, b, and c. So this is one way. The pronouns will always be the subject. Always be the subject, whether stated or implied. If it's not stated, it's implied in the verb itself. Now, we're just going to skip through these examples and go right to the second one. The subject will be articular. There will be a definite article. And here's where I pulled up John 4:24 earlier to show you God is spirit. The reason we know that it doesn't say spirit is God is because of the definite article ho right here, which is translated into English as the. Now, what is a definite article? The key word is definite. It points to something to amplify the definiteness of the noun it refers to. If it does not have it, it would then become indefinite, though sometimes in such certain translations, a certain word orders will already understand that the noun itself does have definiteness to it, but there is a grammatical explanation of why they're not putting the definite article. But the subject here between pneuma and theos will be hotheos because it has a definite article and pneuma does not. This would put God in a broader category of spirit. You would be able to say God is spirit, but you would not be able to say spirit is God. Hebrews 1:7 is a great example of this. God made his angels ministering spirits. Angels also fall in the category of spirit, and we all know that God is not an angel. Therefore, you cannot say spirit is God. We also know there are good spirits and there are evil spirits. They would fall in the category of spirit just as God, but God is not an evil spirit. Therefore, spirit does not equal God. This would be a subset proposition. Now, if it had a definite article in front of pneuma, we would be able to understand it as the word that God is the Spirit and the Spirit is God. It would then be interchangeable, but in this instance, it's not. Now, the third one. The subject will be a proper name, such as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites. The predicate nominative here is Jonah became a sign, where right here you have Iones, tois, actually I didn't pronounce the first word, egeneto, Iones, tois. Oh, that's actually the Nineveh, the signs over here. Semion means a sign. So note that Semion don't have a definite article, and Ionas, sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Ionas doesn't have a definite article. How do I know which one's the subject? Well, this one happens to be a proper name. It falls under the rule of that which is known, therefore it would be the subject. So that's the three ways we know how to identify a subject and a predicate nominative structure. Now, with that, let's go back to the Bible to John 1:1. Okay, wrong button. There we are. Going back to John 1:1. So this is the clause in question. We got theos and hologos. How do we know what is the subject? Just as in John 4:24, hotheos was the subject because pneuma didn't have a definite article and theos did. Here we see theos does not have a definite article, yet hologos does. This would tell us that hologos is the subject, and considering it was mentioned in John 1:1a and John 1:1b, we could point out for a fact that it is that which is known that is being discussed. Now, since theos does not have a definite article, this shows that there is not interchangeability between the two. If it did, you could change them. You could say the Word was God, and you can say God was the Word. But according to the Greek construction here, you would not be able to do that because theos does not have a definite article. Likewise, if you go to Psalms chapter 82, verse 6, in this particular construction, you're going to see estay. The verb estay does not have a subject stated, but it is implied because it's built into the word itself. As I pointed out, I think previously in this video, if not, I'll do it again, but I did in my last video. Estay is a second person, which we translate as you. It is plural, so it would be you all. You all is the subject of the verb of to be. You all are. What are they? Theoi. Theoi is the plural form of theos, which is God. It is also nominative. It is the predicate nominative. It does not have a definite article, therefore it's not going to show interchangeability. And I would honestly, I'm going to state an opinion here. I don't have a scholar to back me up on this that I know of. But if the subject is a pronoun, it is identified within the context. And if its predicate has a definite article, it is also definite, which would be identified by the context. I would say in such instance that this would be numerical identity. This would be a convertible proposition. I need to find a scholar to back that up. However, seeing that theoi does not have a definite article, this would put the you all in the broader category of gods, which is the same place as John 1:1c, that John 1:1c is placing the word into the larger category of God. Both of these are subset propositions. And I raise a grammatical point with someone that if you're going to try to say that John 1:1c is an ontological implication, you must be consistent and apply that same principle to Psalm 82, verse 6. Now, this word right here, huoi, would be plural for sons. So if there are many sons that is in the ontological category of God, how can the Son be the only Son of God in that category? That's a grammatical point that you can raise, but let's get back to the point of the teaching discussing itself. Let's go back to the Greek grammars beyond the basics. Let's see what we have next. The pecking order. We'll talk about the pecking order, and then I think we'll go back to the video. Shalom, my friends. So, what if both subject and predicate have one of these three tags? And that is actually applicable in Psalm 82, verse 6, where I was trying to make the statement that if theoi had a definite article, I believe they would be convertible. So maybe he's about to answer the question for me. We'll see. So what if they both have the same tags? What if there is a pronoun used and there is an articular noun used? Which is the subject and what is the semantic relationship? First, when both substantives bear such grammatical tags, the pecking order is as follows. Pronouns has the greatest priority. It will be the subject regardless of what the regardless of the grammatical tag the other substantive has. Okay? So it's basically saying this isn't actually answering my question. This is a pecking order. If I have a pronoun and I have a definite article or a proper name, how do I know which one is the subject, which is the predicate, and pronoun gets priority. Pronoun will always be the subject, which means the definite noun and the proper name will be the predicate. So it gives you a few examples here in Greek Grammars Beyond Debate, so I'm not going to go through them. But it says articular nouns and proper names seem to be equal priority. In instances where the one substantive is articular and the other is a proper name, or where both are articular, word order may be the determining factor. So I will actually read an example here, and then I want to go to a famous. I wonder if he'll even mention it here in this clause. No, but I'm going to go address Hebrews 1:8 real quick. So we'll just read this first example. It says, Ho pater Amon Avraham Estin. This would be the father of us, Abraham is. Now you have a definite noun. It was ho pater, and you have a proper name, which is Avraham. Which one is the subject? So it says the word order may be the determining factor. So what? He's just leaving that hang in the air. So I think what he's trying to, well, what's this 25 say real quick? You guys can't read that. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's not popping up on the screen for you to see. I'm sorry. It's a footnote. So basically, I think that what he's trying to convey is the first noun would be the subject, the second would be the predicate. So let's consider that with John 1 8. Let's go there real quick, because that came up in my last live, and I saw it right at the end when I closed the live, and I didn't get to address it. It does not fall in relationship to the live that I was holding based on John 17:3 and appositions. And if you did want to interpret this right here, ho thronos su ho logos, this right here, if you wanted to interpret that appositionally, you would actually call the throne a God throne. If this was an appositional construction, this would be a God throne. Now, what about if it's a predicate nominative? Well, you see ho thronos and ho theos are, ho thronos and ho theos are both definite. They both have the definite article. That means this would truthfully be like this would be a convertible proposition, but the subject would be the first noun used, ho thronos, of you, or ho thronos su, the throne of you. And theos would be the predicate, adding more clarification to the throne. So if we were to translate this as a predicate nominative, and I personally hold that it should be translated as a predicate nominative, it would be your throne is God. Now, someone might want to gain offense to this, and they would ask me, what am I talking about? Your God is throne. No, your throne is God, and God is your throne. You can do them interchangeably. But why would we be calling God the throne of the king? Now, this is obviously conveying to us a metaphorical identity or a metaphorical meaning that the throne of the king, his seat of authority, is God, which implies that the Father or that God gives him his authority. Now, without that throne, there would be no king. Without God, there would be no authority. Now, some would argue that this is a direct address. I push back on that interpretation because ho theos is not in the vocative case. So you cannot assert that it must be a direct address. It isn't that way here, nor is it that way in the Septuagint of Psalm 45, verse 6 or 5. Septuagint numbers a little different in Psalms. Now, to give you an example of a direct address in Hebrews, if you wanted to try to force this, I doubt that the author of Hebrews would have left out the vocative case here, but used the vocative case in Hebrews 1:10, where it says, and you at the beginning, Lord, you at the beginning. Curry is the vocative case, and as you can see on the screen, that the definition of a vocative case is a direct address or an exclamation. So in verse 10, we see that the citation directly addresses someone, but in verse 8, there is no direct address. This is just simply the nominative case, not the vocative. And the nominative conveys a noun or pronoun when it's the subject of a verb. Now, here I would argue that the verb is implied, that ho thronos would, ho thronos su ho theos would be a predicate nominative. Now, I consider my position having more grammatical weight than one who tries to force the Son being called God, because there's no vocative case to validate that. Therefore, your interpretation would be ambiguous. However, I would say that the verb of to be is implied here, where that throne is called God. And that would go with 1 Chronicles 29, verse 23, where Solomon sits on the throne of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. God's name is in that throne, ruling over the kingdom of God. Now, moving backward once more, let's go back to Greek Grammar Beyond the Basics before we pick up in the video. See, the semantic relationship, it's going to talk about convertible proposition. So, let's read about this real quick before we get back to the video, just in case it's relevant. Second, the semantic relationship in such instances is that the convertible proposition, now I get it. So he left us hanging up here. He says that the word order may be the indicator, right? Hold on, that's a D. D follows under the pecking order. Okay, I'm wrong. This is not related to what we were just discussing. So, we'll continue. The second semantic relationship in such instances is that of the convertible proposition. That is to say, when both substantives meet one of the three qualifications of the subject. Both substantives must meet the three qualifications of the subject. Consider this for John 17:3. I didn't bring this up in my previous video. Then they become interchangeable. See examples in the preceding section. All right. Exegetical significant passages. There are scores of passages impacted by the semantics of predicate nominative construction. Just a few will be noted. Subset proposition, 1 John 4:8, God is love. The subset proposition is clearly seen in this passage. God has the quality of love, but is not identical to love. God is love. God has the quality of love, but love is not God. God is not identical to love. If this were a convertible proposition, it would affirm pantheism, or the least pantheism. I'm not sure what those are. John 1:1, the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Again, a subset proposition is the envisioned here. The Logos, belongs to the larger category known as Theos. The force of this construction is most likely to emphasize the nature of the Word, not his identity. Now, real quick, the word nature, or what kind of nature are we talking about? Is this ontological nature or nature in general sense? Now, is this a theological interpretation or is this a grammatical necessity? This is where I would raise Psalm 82:6 in contrast to John 1:1c, seeing they both have the same grammatical structure, emphasizing the same grammatical interpretation. So if you're going to go ontologically that the word has the same ontology as God, then you're going to have to include the judges in Psalm 82 as ontologically God. It's the same construction. So it's emphasizing the nature of the word, not his identity. That is to say, the word is true deity, but he is not the same person as the theos mentioned in the earlier verse. Now that is an interpretation. That's not a grammatical explanation. Because to say that the word is true deity, but not the same person in the theos in the previous verse or in the previous clause, he meant to say, is to imply that there is. Okay, so there is nothing in the Greek itself that would distinguish personhood in John 1:1b and John 1:1c. All we know is the word was toward God in some respect. The preposition pros is directional toward, and the word was God in some respect, qualitatively. There's nothing here to imply that the word itself is a distinct person from the God that it is directionally related to. Nothing. That is a theological interpretation that you cannot gather from the grammar itself. So it gives some examples here. The one working in it, you is God. And it talks more on convertible propositions, such as John 20, verse 31, where it's saying these things, Jesus is the Christ. Okay, that's a convertible proposition. I'm just peeping out a little bit. Okay, now this would be an interesting area, but let's go ahead and get back to that video and try to get him caught up to where we're at, and we'll come back to Greek grammar beyond the basics.
If the word order is not going to be our guide. And so we'll discuss that at quite a bit of length. And then the semantics and exegetical significance of subject, predicate, nominative constructions. There are two kinds of semantic relationships, as I alluded to earlier. And we want to discuss how to distinguish subject from predicate nominative. And then we will look at some passages to discuss this, all of these semantic issues, and how to distinguish this. I think it will be hopefully fairly illuminating. Two kinds of semantic relationships we have. The first is what I call a subset proposition, where one is the subset or a part of a larger group or entity, and the other is convertible proposition. That is the same as A equals B equals A. The subset proposition is really the usual relationship that we have in predicate nominative constructions. Here, the predicate nominative describes the class to which the subject belongs. The subject is a smaller entity in terms of the lexical idea or whatever the imagery is that we're dealing with in that sentence than the predicate nominative. So a convertible proposition indicates an identical exchange, and both nouns have an identical referent. However, it's still important to wrestle with which one is the subject. Let me give an illustration on that. If I asked you, who is the greatest basketball player who's ever lived? You would say, the greatest basketball player who's ever lived is Michael Jordan. Now, that answer, the greatest basketball player who's ever lived, is an answer to the question, who is the greatest basketball player? If I ask the question, who is Michael Jordan? Then the answer would be Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player who ever lived, and not so good at baseball or golf, things like that. You could add those other things. But here's the point, is that answer Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player who ever lived is an answer to the question, who is Michael Jordan? It is a convertible proposition. If you say Michael Jordan is the greatest basketball player is Michael Jordan. But the issue has to do with what question is being answered. We'll see how important that is when we get to a very important verse at the end of John's Gospel. Here's the relationship in chart form between subject and predicate nominative. And you can see that the first one is a subset proposition. Here we would say John, that's the element that is a part of the larger predicate nominative, is a man. John is a man is not the same thing as saying a man is John. Those are two different kinds of statements. John is a man means John belongs to that larger category known as man. But a convertible proposition would be John is the man, or Jesus is the Son of God, or the Son of God is Jesus. They're saying the same thing, but again, the statement has to do with what question is being answered. But that is a convertible proposition. The first one is a subset proposition. Now, how do you distinguish subject from predicate nominative? The general principle for distinguishing subject from predicate nominative is that the subject is the known entity. And either construction, if it's subset or it's a convertible proposition, that subject is the known entity. In a subset proposition, it's going to be a smaller entity that belongs to construction. Subject,
Okay, so real quick, I want to pull up the Bible, and I want you guys to see something. And I'm glad Daniel B. Wallace said that. Maybe I should make another video, a shorter video. Let's go to 1 John chapter 5, verse 20. And let's look at this here clause. This is a clause in itself, right? And this is indeed a predicate nominative. Hutos estin ho alethinos theos, which would be translated as, this is the true God. This right here, this word hutos, this is a demonstrative pronoun. So the question is, what does this demonstrative pronoun refer to? And Daniel B. just answered us. He said it is the subject is always the known entity. Okay, well, what is the known entity? Well, let me get it back into English to simplify it for everybody. It says, we know the Son of God is come and has given us an understanding, that we may know him that is true, or you can just say the true one, that's proper translation. Then it goes on to say that we were in him who is true, and his Son. Now, him who is true apparently has a son, that makes him a father. And that Son is identified as Jesus Christ. That would make it the Father. So him who is true, the Son came to give us an understanding of him who is true. We're in him who is true. In his Son, the known entity in the discourse would be him who is true. And according to Daniel B. Wallace, the subject of this predicate nominal phrase would be the known identity and the known entity. And the known entity would be him who is true. This refers back to the true one who has a son, Jesus Christ. But let's go ahead and let Daniel B. Wallace pick up with what he was saying.
The general principle for distinguishing subject from predicate nominative is that the subject is the known entity. And either construction, if it's subset or it's a convertible proposition, that subject is the known entity. In a subset proposition, it's going to be a smaller entity that belongs to that larger class. If it's convertible, it's still going to be the known entity that is then defined. How do we distinguish subject from predicate nominative? The significance of the following three rules is that when only one nominative substantive has such a grammatical tag, then the semantic relationship will be that of particular to class, that is, a subset construction. And so here's what these three rules are. The subject will be a pronoun, whether it's stated or implied in the verb. When it's stated, then it's emphatic. But even if it's just implied in the verb, that's going to be the subject. Or the subject will be articular. Or the subject will be a proper noun. Those are the three rules on determining subject from predicate nominative. Now, let me give you a little bit of history in this, just a little bit of history. About 115 years ago, there was a grammar, I think by Samuel Green, where he said the distinction between subject and predicate nominative is whichever has the article, that's the subject. That was the rule that was known at that time. In fact, you can trace this through the first half of the 20th century, and no other distinction was very often made in classical and Koine grammars as to the distinction between subject and predicate nominative. One of them has the article, that's the subject. What happens if both have the article? It just wasn't discussed. And then in 1965, Eugene Van Ness Getches wrote The Language of the New Testament, which was a first-year grammar, and he was the first one to develop a real thesis for how to distinguish subject from predicate nominative. He came up with 5 basic rules, the 3 that we have here, plus a couple of others. Now, I'll talk in just a moment why we have just these 3 rules. But then in the early 70s, Lane McGahey wrote his doctoral dissertation under Robert W. Funk, and it was called Toward a Descriptive Analysis of Einai as a Linking Verb in the New Testament. He reduced Getches's 5 rules down to 4, and I have worked with Lane's 4 rules, and I've reduced them down to 3. Now, I won't get into the other 2 rules. You can see those in the grammar, but I don't think that they're particularly valid or particularly helpful, one of the 2. And so these are the 3 basic rules that we are following. In other words, this has taken about 100 years to develop, a little longer than my lifetime, but at least it's simplified for you, and I think it's pretty darn accurate. Let me give you some illustrations. Matthew 3:17, this is my beloved son, hutos, the pronoun is going to be the subject. Now, notice that huios has the article. It is not the subject, even though articular nouns can be the subject. Here, the pronoun is the subject. We'll talk about the priority of which is which or the pecking order in a few minutes. James 5:17, Elijah was a man. Here, the subject will be a proper name. Notice also that in this statement, it's a subset proposition. It's not a convertible proposition because a man is an arthrus. It doesn't fit one of those 3 criteria. It's a larger category to which Elijah belongs. Hebrews 1:10, the heavens are the works of your hands. And here we have the heavens, hoi uranoi. Even though it's at the end of the clause, that's the subject. It has the article. And then the works of your hands has no article with it. And so the heavens, rather than the works of your hands are the heavens, the subject will be articular. Mark 2:28, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And here we have the Son coming after kurios, which stands first in the sentence, but the articular noun is what's going to be the subject. Now this is, I'd say, a convertible proposition because of what's known as Apollonius canon, which we'll get into when we get into the genitive case. But nevertheless, there are some exceptions to whether it's a subset or a convertible proposition. Luke 1:18, Zechariah said to the angel, I am an old man. Ego is the subject. It's going to be a pronoun, and it's a subset proposition. Luke 11:30, Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites. Proper name is the subject, and semaion is an anarthrous noun, and consequently it's a subset proposition. Acts 2:15, it is the 3rd hour of the day. Notice I put it in parentheses because it's embedded in the verb esten. The subject will be a pronoun even if it's only implied. John 4:24, here we have the verb implied and we have the subject stated. It's hotheos. Pneuma is the predicate nominative. The King James incorrectly has this translated as God as a spirit. We'll talk about why that's an incorrect translation when we get to the lesson on the article, part 2. But for now, it's important to know that the subject will be articular and that God belongs to that larger class we're speaking in terms of not in terms of theology, but that there are other spirits beside God, and God is spirit. He is spiritual in his essence. He is spirit in his essence. It's not saying God is the Holy Spirit, but that he is spirit. 1 Corinthians 3:5 might seem like I'm throwing a curveball at you. What then is Apollos? The subject here is going to be the proper name. Now, why isn't the pronoun the subject? Te is a pronoun, interrogative pronoun. The reason is that interrogative pronouns are translated first because that's how we do it with questions. But remember the basic principle is that the subject is the known entity, and you can easily convert this into a statement instead of a question, and it would go as follows. Apollos is what? Or Apollos belongs to what larger category? And consequently, in interrogative pronouns, that's the one pronoun that is going to be the predicate nominative rather than the subject. Now, the pecking order of the predicate nominative constructions is as follows. The pronoun has the greatest priority, except for interrogative pronouns. It will be the subject regardless of what grammatical tag the other substantive has. Articular nouns and proper names seem to have equal priority. In all the research that we've done on the New Testament and patristic Greek and other Greek, I've had several students do work on this. I've worked on it. I've had term papers in a course called Advanced Greek Grammar at Dallas Seminary where I teach, where we've worked on this, master's theses done on this. Articular nouns and proper names seem to have equal priority. In instances where one substantive is articular and the other is a proper name, or where both are articular, then word order may be the determining factor and normally seems to be. In Matthew 11:14, here we see, and if you will accept it, he is Elijah. Here you have a pronoun and a proper name. The pronoun is the subject. John 15:1, my Father is the vine dresser. Both of these have an article, but it's the first named entity that is the subject. Acts 9.
All right, so going back to that real quick, he brought this example up, and you see that both the vine dresser and the father of me have a definite article, and he said the first entity mentioned would be the subject, and that would be the situation where, like I brought up Hebrews 1:8, ho thronos su ho theos. So the proper interpretation would be that the throne, your throne, would be the subject, and theos would be the predicate, and that it would be saying your throne is God. Now, this would, I personally believe, be a convertible proposition because they're equal in definiteness, but he didn't state that, so I won't add more than that.
An article, but it's the first named entity that is the subject. Acts 9:20, he is the Son of God. Here we have an articular noun, a pronoun. The pronoun has the priority. Matthew 13:55, is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? Mother and Mary have equal priority. Brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas also have equal priority. It's a convertible proposition. 1 John 5:9, the testimony of God is greater. This is the testimony of God. Once again, the pronoun has priority over articular nouns. John 8:39, which is often mistranslated. Here we have, our father is Abraham. That's the word order we have. And the rule is between an articular noun and a proper name, whatever comes first is going to be the subject. It's not Abraham is our father, even though that feels a little bit more natural in English.
All right, so here's a great example. So in John 8:39, you got ho pater, Amon, Avram, Esteen. Okay, and he's already told us that definite articles and proper names are basically equal in priority, but the one that comes first would be the subject. But note his brackets down here that says convertible proposition, but the first named entity is the subject. Now, this would be very much like the same structure in Hebrews 1:8. Instead of saying the Father of us, it says the throne of you. And then it says the God, and then it says Abraham. Remember, and articular nouns and proper names are equal in priority, right? So, if he believes this is a convertible proposition, that you could actually say Abraham is our father, and you can say our father is Abraham. You can say God is your throne, and your throne is God. So he kind of answered the question indirectly by the statements he's made.
It's not Abraham as our father, even though that feels a little bit more natural in English. It's our father is Abraham. And so the question is, who is our father? Our father is Abraham. John 20:31. These things have been written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ. Notice Jesus is first, the proper name. Ha Christos comes after that. This is a convertible proposition, but the first named entity is the subject. Now, this is the verse that I said has a lot of interesting things going on for it that we want to discuss. D.A. Carson, in some articles and in his commentary on John, has argued that this passage should be translated, the Christ is Jesus. And he's saying that because he's essentially arguing that the question in the reader's mind is, well, who is this Messiah? Who is the Messiah? They would know what Messiah means, but they don't recognize who Jesus is. That presupposes a Jewish audience. If the question is, who is Jesus Christ? Oh, well, he is the Messiah. Let me explain to you what Messiah means. Then John is writing to a Gentile audience. Now, Carson argues that the translation of this passage is just the opposite of what it should be. And one of the things that he has argued is that he argues this from grammar, that an articular noun takes priority over a proper name. And he considers the New Testament to contain firm evidence to this effect. But the evidence actually moves in the opposite direction. Either the first noun is the subject, or really the proper name is at times. In short, there is no grammatical argument that John is written to Jews. In fact, Carson's main argument uses 5 passages where the word order is still that which comes first. But when you look at some other passages, and I won't get into these just because we have these in the grammar, and for sake of time, you can read them buried in the footnotes. But there are other passages that do fit what Carson is talking about, and it follows actually the rule that we've suggested. So I think that his argument, at least on the grammatical level, that John is written to Jews, does not hold water. I think we'd have to say, at least grammatically, it looks as if it is written to Gentiles. I think there's plenty of other evidence that it goes in that direction, but that gets outside of grammar. In 1 John 4:8, we have God is love. This is not a convertible proposition. A convertible proposition would be, say, love is God. That would be pantheism or panentheism. And it's ha theos. You have the article with theos. You don't have it with agape. And it's a subset proposition. And then in John 1:1, we have the Word was with God and the Word was God. In Tyndale's translation, in 1525, he says, and God was the Word. The King James Bible actually corrected that almost 100 years later when they said the Word was God.
Now, I want you to consider what he just said. Let's go back and hear it again.
He says, and God was the God.
Hold on.
And then in John 1:1, we have the Word was with God and the Word was God. In Tyndale's translation, in 1525, he says, and God was the Word.
Tyndale's Bible said God was the Word.
The King James Bible actually corrected that.
The King James Bible corrected that. So God was the Word is an incorrect translation. In John 1:14, what became flesh? The Word. Not God became flesh, the Word became flesh, because remember, God was the Word would be an incorrect translation.
Almost 100 years later when they said the Word was God. They recognized that the articular noun is going to be the subject of the last clause, even though Theos comes first. And virtually all translations since that time have agreed with that. But here what we have, and this is very important to understand, is a subset proposition. This means the word belongs to the larger category known as God. It is not a convertible proposition. Notice there's no article with theos. And consequently, what we're saying here is that the word belongs to this class known as deity. I actually prefer the translation, and the word was divine, as long as we understand that divine is an adjective that can only be applied to true deity. We use divine for Kentucky Fried Chicken nowadays.
Now, me personally, I do not like the translation, the word was divine, because divine is an adjective when you're describing something that is God-like. If they wanted to convey the word was divine, they could have used a predicate adjective instead of a predicate nominative. And the Greek does have a word for divine. So personally, I interpret John 1:1c as the word was the person of the Father. But the person of the Father is not the word because it's not a convertible proposition. So this word is in the broader category of the person of the Father, such as this would be a qualitative predicate nominative, such as God is love. Love is also in a broader category of God expressing a quality of God. This word then would be, hold on, I'm saying this wrong. Love, God is in the broader category of love. That's what it is. I said that wrong. So that's a false equivalency. Ignore that, scratch that. But I believe that it's saying that the identity of this word is God because it's God's word, but the word itself, that God Himself is not that word. It's a nuanced understanding, and this is the importance of understanding the Greek and the Hebrew behind our English translations, because those nuances are important.
But divine, in what I'm saying, is it doesn't refer to angels, it would simply refer to the Godhead. It is not correct.
Hold up. I should clip that. What do you say?
To angels, it would simply
Hold on.
only be applied to true deity. We use divine for Kentucky Fried Chicken nowadays. But divine, in what I'm saying, is it doesn't refer to angels, it would simply refer to the Godhead.
Divine does not refer to angels, it refers to the Godhead. So, if the word is Jesus, Jesus is not the angel of the Lord. Thank you, Mr. Wallace.
It is not correct to say that in both clauses the word was with God and the word was God, that we're talking about the exact same thing when it comes to theos. Ha logos ein pros ton theon means that the word, the second person of the Trinity, was with the first person of the Trinity. And in the last clause, and the word was God, is not the same thing as saying ha logos ein ha theos. That would be a convertible proposition. And to translate that into theological terms, it would be like saying the second person of the Trinity was with the first person of the Trinity, and the second person of the Trinity was the first person of the Trinity. This is a confusion that goes all the way back to Caldwell's rule in 1933 and how he understood that the inversion of the rule actually was valid, and scholars have followed in that train. One of them even said theos ein ha logos is the same thing as saying ha logos ein ha theos. It's not. Now we're talking about a subset proposition. We'll get into this more when we look at the article for the lesson 2 in the article. But the point is that what John is saying here is not that the word is the same person as the theos mentioned earlier, but that he belongs to the same class as theos.
Okay, so going back to the logos here, let's see what we got going on here. He didn't discuss some of this stuff. That's the end of the video with Daniel B. Wallace on the predicate nominative sentence. I actually purchased his videos from Logos software, and they were about $200 for all his videos. So I think that I want to use his videos to help me in my teaching of these things. So, because it would be great to hear from the man himself who actually wrote the book that I'm citing from. And notice how he threw things in there that wasn't in his book that actually hurt his theological position. So, let's go ahead and read a little bit more from this and see if we can identify what's going on. So, substitution for predicate nominative. This is ice plus accusative. Ice is a preposition that denotes the point reached or entered into. And what follows ice will always be an accusative. So ice plus the accusative is occasionally found replacing the predicate nominative in the New Testament. Although this construction is found in the papyri, sorry, it is usually due to a semantic influence. The Hebrew prefix lamed, which represents 2 or 4. This idiom is frequent in the Old Testament quotations, as can be seen in the references below, that the construction is equivalent to the predicate nominative construction can be seen in Matthew 19, 5 through 6. In verse 5, the entrance into the new state is mentioned with this construction. Esontai oi duo isaraka mian. The two shall become one flesh. So the two shall become one flesh. Interesting. So I'm guessing this esontai must be a irregular form of. Actually, I think that's I've like a middle voice of the verb Amy, but I'm not sure. Duo obviously means two, right? And ice would be the point entered into or reached. The point they enter into or reach is the meon circa, which is one flesh. The two, oh, well, hold on. All right, so followed by the next verse by the declaration of the resultant state with the normal predicate nominative. So the next verse says, hote, uketi, esin, esin, duo, ala, sarexmia. So this verse here, I don't recognize all these words. Obviously, that's one flesh. Oh, they are no more two but one. I remember the verse now. So this would be R2, but one flesh. These two, I don't really remember what those two Greek words mean. This construction occurs with genomai, Amy, typically in the future tense and less frequently, typically in the future tense. I'm thinking about Hebrews 1:8 because I think that he may actually be preparing to talk about Hebrews 1:8, and less frequently logizomai. So with genomai, we have, and I'm just going to read the English because you guys are probably tired of my third grader reading levels of Greek. The stone that has become the chief cornerstone, alluding to Psalm 118. So the stone has become the chief cornerstone. Okay, so this ice is representing the point entered into or reached. So it's showing the change into something else, a transition into something else. That's what's been expressed. and there's a Hebrews 1:5. I'm just want to see real quick. All right, so he didn't address Hebrews 1:8, and I thought he was going to. That's why I read that. So that said, that's going to conclude this session where I'm discussing John 1:1c to try to explain that the Word is not God in the absolute sense. It is qualified. It is a quality of God, or God is a quality of the Word, but the Word itself is not God in numerical sense. You can't say God was the Word, but you can say the Word was God. And since you can't say God was the Word, you cannot say God became flesh. You can say the Word became flesh. Now, I do want to hold another live on John 1:14 under this type of structure, but I do not think I will be holding that live today. I may go live here in a little bit because I would like to come back and talk more about John 17:3 and have guests on the panel. But till then, shalom. May God be with you all, keep you safe, and lead you in all truth. Amen. Let me close myself out here on YouTube and TikTok.